Hello, everybody. Bo Bush here with Osmosi. First of all, thank you very much for joining us. And a little bit about Osmosi. We provide customized data reporting, all the analytics and the modeling that go along with that for strategic support. And we provide this primarily for people in the competitive intelligence field, forecasting, portfolio, business development, project management. We're also very excited. Recently, we've just signed not one, but two deals. We will be the only provider of clinical trial data in the Bloomberg terminals in the finance industry and FactSet terminals. So we're really excited. It's a big milestone for us as a company, and more of those to come. But for today, we're talking a little bit about state-of-the-art competitive intelligence. This is part two. Don't worry if you missed part one or you can't remember anything we talked about last year in part one. We're going to have a quick recap on that. But what do we really mean by state-of-the-art competitive intelligence? We mean really tying more into real-time information that feeds into the specific business needs and requirements that our clients have, and with some outputs. And this allows our clients who used to spend way too much time looking at staring at a large Excel file and trying to get it just cleaned up enough that they can then summarize and report it, gets them out of that business and into the business of what does this data mean? We take all of their good thinking, we build that into the model so that it all just flows through as the data shows up, clean in the way they need it. And this way they can start really spending the time where their expertise is, which is what are the implications of this information? So let's have this recap, shall we? So this is, again, we're talking about cleaning. We're just like everybody else, we're talking about the machine learning approach. We feel like we've made some really good progress in this. I think last year, the key we said was you want to start with data that's longitudinal in nature, not just a nowcast to build from, right? So we have especially in the US, we have the 20 years of that clinical trial data. We have every version of that. Anytime from the first one that they post to the next one that the sponsor will make an edit to the data, all the way down. So we can really start to understand and learn more about recruitment timing, primary completions, all of that. And so you need to have that if you want to start making more predictions. And then the key to this, right, is it's got to be clean. It's got to be clean in a way that makes sense for you as the user of it. We found that this is the set of items that's super helpful, at least in clinical strategy, but also in some of the other elements that we're going to start talking to you about today, like probability of success, attaching a value to it, predicting timing even further, that sort of thing. And in fact, what I said last year, actually, I said that this was not sexy, but it was super important. I'm going to take the not sexy part back because we also spoke about full circuit library maintenance. And what I meant by that when we were explaining that is you have your data cleaning libraries. And sure, it's one thing when you recognize it, you assign it, you push it in, it's all clean. What do you do when you don't recognize it? That's that other part of the circuit that everybody seems to be wrestling with, right? So I'll show you an example of an internal tool that we've built to really facilitate this further. So when something comes in that we don't recognize, it would flow through to this tool, right? You'll have your text snippets. It'll do a search for text snippets related to it from whatever sources are helpful for you in this. In this case, we're looking for Target. So we're searching articles from PubMed and other journals along those lines. We have our text snippets. We have a machine learning model that predicts, that's number two, what the target might be. And then the supervised training part of this was where a human looks at it and says, yes, that's correct, or no, it should be, this other target. Now, of course, as our confidence intervals get higher and bigger in this, you won't need the human for all of those, just the really hard or new ones. And over time, the model is going to get better and better, because when they save and push this, the data goes into two places. One, it goes into our cleaning libraries and begins cleaning that item every time it sees it in the future like that. And it also goes back to the model to help the model find it better next time, or to support that and other findings later. So I take back, I think that's sexy. And what we're finding is actually this type of tool, this type of approach, I'm just giving an example in targets, right? But what we're finding is our clients have a ton of data, in their basement that they can't connect. They're siloed, big vats of expensive information and data that they're dying to bring together. We're starting to see that this could actually be something we could kind of build up a little bit further and make it more robust and offer that to our clients to help them bring their data together, where we could either support them or build it for them and let them do their own supervised training and build out their own databases to aggregate everything together. So more on that in the future. Enriching our data. This is the goal. Once we get it cleaned in certain areas, we can start to assign additional data elements to it based on other databases that exist elsewhere. I'm going to show some examples of that in a minute with what we've done around value and risk and predicting clinical trial results announcements. Okay, so let's go to the next one. Before I get into the first piece, I want to own up on our predictions from last year. If you remember, last year when we presented, it was early fall, same as this year. And we heard vaccines are coming, and that's what we were reading about. What's coming and when? And will these vaccines be okay? Very different world than just a year ago, right? So one of the things we predicted is the launch order. Pfizer BioNTech, we predicted first. If you remember, they were neck and neck with Moderna, but we saw company experience as having given kind of a slight lead. Pfizer has a deep wealth of experience in terms of launching products globally and the whole manufacturing component of that. So we gave them the edge over Moderna. This was also the week I think we had Pharma CI last year. We just heard that AstraZeneca was having some concerns around blood clotting. Now, we predicted that J&J would have similar concerns as well, because it's a very similar approach, and they did. But what we saw in that, again, the two companies presented with the same problem handled it slightly differently, and in the end, J&J came out as number 3. So in terms of the first 3 predictions, we got 2 out of 3 right there. So there's that piece. Next, we predicted how many people will actually have experience with the vaccine. Remember, we've never seen vaccines come out this quickly before, right? So everyone's feeling a little bit nervous. And we predicted that well over 100,000 people would have the vaccine by the end of 2020. And so we were off by that. We actually exceeded that in terms of what we saw in clinical trials. We're off by about 16%. Interestingly, our prediction for Q3 is very different. We were off by 16% as well. That's not a typo. Different numbers that we're predicting, same methodology, so maybe it's not too amazing that it's 16% on both, but still very interesting. And I want to put these up there, and I want to continue doing this. We are not going to be afraid of making predictions where we're not exactly correct every time. I want to take a page out of Thomas Edison's book, in the search for making a commercially viable light bulb. There's a ton of quotes, many misquotes about how many times they failed before they were successful. And really, and the way Edison framed it is, no, we learn something every time, right? We learned what wouldn't work. And I think that applies to us with our predictions here and the modeling here. We're going to continue to do our very best and put together what seems the most viable set of elements for making a prediction. And when we're wrong, we're going to go back and tweak it further. But you have to make those predictions first. So continue to see that from us. We believe that the folks that dare to be wrong sooner, then they're the ones that will be right sooner, ultimately. Okay, let's talk about connecting and enriching that data as we were speaking about before. So we did this, and we added 3 core data elements, but they're all fairly complex and they required additional data to bring in as well. And really, we want to assign this at the clinical trial level, right? So how can we really boost the value of that clinical trial data? First of all, we cleaned it. We automated the reporting of the clean clinical trial activity. That's important. But now let's add a few other dimensions to this, right? Let's add a value index, just an index. We're not predicting dollars. but we're just kind of predicting a value element to that. And what are the core components to any value? Even when we're talking dollars, we need to understand what the disease burden is, right? So that means we need to tie in with the World Health Organization and how they do that. They're using DALYs to kind of measure that. It's a whole other topic, but cleaning those disease areas to match the disease areas in your clinical trial data is important for that. Willingness to pay. So really looking at what are the prices that are being given to some of these drugs in terms of, where they're going to play out and what that looks like in the different diseases, chronic versus acute. Also the scientific focus. Are there a ton of folks being able to deliver this, or is this in an area that's kind of niche or unique? That's also a key player. And then whether or not it's novel. It's a no-brainer, but you know what? That's not so easy to match all the time when you're thinking about it. You get your orange and purple book data, but you have to clean that the same way you're cleaning your clinical trial data before you can match it at the primary treatment level for that clinical trial. So all of those steps need to be taken in order to do that. But when you do, every clinical trial, you'll know whether or not it involves a novel product or not. Next, this is something we've been trying to crack for a while: probability of success and probability of launch. Now, it takes what I was saying just now about that primary treatment. What is the primary treatment in that clinical trial? Not always super easy to pull out or extract, right? And then cleaning in a way that you can match it. Again, we need novel treatments here. For that, novel is going to be a big piece of that. But before I get to that, let's think about probability of success. You see something early phases and you want to know how often did it proliferate? How often did it move forward through the phases? And that's, this is the way we've been doing it for, decades in this industry. And we typically do that at the disease area level. That's super helpful. I don't always see regulatory success at the disease area level. We're giving that because we saw a big difference there. But there's more to it. There's much more to it. There's that company experience that I pointed out before has a tremendous impact, we found, in predicting the likelihood of success. So a certain disease area may have in general what the likelihood of success is, but then you have to factor in the two biggest ones we saw that we thought were important enough to include in our calculations would be company experience and whether or not the treatment is novel, right? That's the no-brainer part. And those really help to kind of play out and predict that success. So next is timing. When will we be hearing about results? This is especially important on that finance side of things. One of the reasons we're in those terminals is we're predicting what they call catalyst events, but really when will we see announcements? So what do you have to do for that? You have to take all of the company announcements that we're seeing, you have to be able to link that back to a trial, right? You do that over a period of years, and then you're able to start making better predictions about when we'll hear about it. If you've ever just tried to add a certain amount of time to a primary completion date, you'll see you're right about maybe 20% of the time because it's all over the place. So you really have to build, there's a few more elements that kind of drive that, and there's still some bit of randomness to it as well. But what you really, another helpful item that we found were industry conferences. If you're expecting results 2 months after a big industry event, likely those results will be at that industry event, at least preliminary, right? So these are some 3 key elements that have had a huge impact for our clients on the data, and it's all about the cleaning and the combining of the data for our clients. So mentioned before, primary was in forecasting and R&D strategy, at least with this clinical trial data. But we're finding now that this data, when we add these elements, has a huge impact on portfolio. Now, typically portfolio, our competitive intelligence clients would support them roughly in terms of, well, here's when we think a competitor will launch a product. And that's still absolutely viable and possible here with this approach. But now what you can look at too further, which is if these are the disease areas that are really driving our growth in the near term, right? Then who else is there? Who else will really be digging in? And are they invested maybe even further than us? Really important kind of portfolio elements beyond just when do we think a competitive product might launch. Business development. Now, the no-brainer on that is the search, right? The cleaner your data, the better your search, the more robust you can trust your results. There's always that worry, what are we missing? Business development, the cleaner your data, the less you'll be missing, trust me. And we've gone head-to-head with some of our competitors in terms of finding those, and we come out, because of this cleaning approach I mentioned, we come out ahead every time. And then oh wait, on the business development side, one other thing I didn't mention is when you have this and you roll it up at the value level, you're actually be able to do better matchmaking, and you're able to kind of do a heat map around where the activity is and who you can maybe pick up that's a better fit for you. And I'll show some examples of that in a minute. And then R&D operations, that's really around that recruitment timing, the uptake, what can you expect from your competitors? What is the optimal set of facilities to do a clinical trial in that will really give you the right amount of exposure, as well as optimizing your recruitment time. All that's possible when you tie this together. So let me show some examples of that. It looks like a simple slide, right? Top 20 performing pharmaceutical pipelines in 2021. It's risk-adjusted value index, and off to the right are some examples of catalyst events for this group. So this is just your top 20, but we can do this we can rank every single company that is in development now. Once you have this value index and we're risk adjusting it, right? Those two need to go together, right? So the numbers don't mean much other than a ranking. But what you can do, and again, we can figure out if we're watching one of these or certain disease areas, you can find the catalyst events related to those to help you understand and predict what will happen. You also have the likelihood of success. But you can expand this out further, right? Forget the total score. What if we looked at it across disease areas, therapy areas? This is actually something in the middle. It's what we call our sub-therapy areas. We have disease area, you could dig into this kind of at the tumor level if you're looking at oncology, but you can kind of spread this out. As you can see, a lot of the activity is in oncology for these top 20 companies. A few have some activity a little bit further out. And so obviously digging into this at the disease area level for some of these would be very helpful. And I'm going to show an example of that in a minute. But before I do, I'm going to show another dimension on this. What if we looked at these companies instead of at their total? What if we looked at them by their pipeline, right? So now here's their total index. And then you can see phase one, what percentage of that is in phase one, phase two, and phase three. Now, why do we do that? Because we really want to assess the pipeline balance, the early pipeline. And this is sorted by how much of their pipeline is early versus late. So at the top of the list, those are with kind of the least amount of early pipeline. And as a result, you can understand the impact and really think about it in terms of the eagerness or willingness to pay for some of the BD opportunities and what a good BD opportunity might look like. For each of these, we understand where their heat map is, where their disease area focus is, and we understand where their pipeline strengths and weaknesses are. So being able to predict who they might be looking for as a good partner is a little bit easier. And you could see, you probably want to be in the middle of this list, somewhere in the middle of the pack. The folks in the yellow on the way down, they still want to boost their early pipeline, but they might be able to wait for the right opportunity to come along. So they don't have to pay maybe quite the same premium, and they can wait for the right fit. The folks at the very bottom, they actually might want to be looking for some business development activity that's happening, in the later phases, because they're a little heavy in the early side. So there might be some licensing that comes from that group. Okay, and when we have all of this, we can actually identify some mid to small size companies that would be really good fits, right? We could find kind of what the right niche is in terms of pipeline, where they are early to late, and what disease areas they're focused in. And we can, of course, look at the catalyst events to start tracking how well are they doing towards that. And that's one piece, but when we bring both of those together and we have the right search targets in place, we can then do what we've got a compatibility matrix here. Now, this is a simplified one, but you could build this, whatever is important to you or to your company, whatever the right priorities are. And then we can find those that have the best fit. So you have your top 20 going down on the left side, and then you have across the top, these are some target companies that fit roughly at the disease area level. This is just for the oncology component of this, right? And then you could look down, the darker the square, the better the fit. So there's some companies that are a better fit for almost all of the top 20. These are the ones that we're going to start citing as probably more likely to be acquired. But you can build this out, whatever is important to you, in terms of not just what kind of companies you might be looking for, but how well of a fit for some of the other companies that are coming after them as well. Okay, one last insight. When we're doing all of this, we're seeing a really interesting trend. Now, everything I've shown you up to now has been for clinical trials where they have at least one clinical facility or one clinical site in the United States. Now, when we first ran this, we didn't run that. We pulled it from the US Clinical Trial Registry. We figured that's all we need to do, right? Well, we saw some interesting elements here. 3 companies that were not on the radar at all last year popped up, and they popped up with strong novel pipelines that rival our top 20 companies that we normally see in that mix. This is really interesting, and I think it's a sign of things to come even further. These guys just showing up strong. It's really interesting too that they don't have any clinical sites in the US, but they're registered in the clinical trial registry in the US, almost advertising, right? So this is something we're going to want to keep an eye on. This might be something actually for some of those other companies at the bottom of that list I was mentioning before. This might be some licensing opportunities. That's the new emerging trend. We're starting to see US and EU companies starting to look at and license in late stage deals from China. So that's kind of that's different than the pharmaceutical industry that I grew up in. So that's kind of a key thing to watch for. And also, because we're seeing this, just as a fair warning, you might want to think about your filter settings when you're trying to pull clinical trials. Even if you're pulling it from a US clinical trial registry, you could see some of these guys mixing in. It's important to keep note on them. Whether or not you include them, it depends on what your analysis is, what you're searching for. Okay, so that's it. I think we're going to come up and wrap here. The bottom line is let's all start making predictions. You know, nobody gets promoted for being wrong often, but I tell you, those that dare to be wrong now will be the earliest to be right later. Guaranteed. Talk to Thomas Edison. Connecting our data, the power of that. We're talking clinical trial registry for years. It's just been used, you know, just kind of to give a status of today, what we think. So much more powerful when we have it cleaned properly. We're not spending all of our time data processing, and kind of we can put that and let the code take care of that so that we can get back to the implications. There's so much we can do with it. And the techniques we're using there, we're going to be able to apply in many other areas in terms of cleaning and connecting data for our clients. And then finally, the markets are evolving, right? This isn't, we're no longer in the pharmaceutical industry that we grew up in. And we're seeing these trends emerge all the time. So let's always think about how we're filtering, how we're looking at the marketplace, and ask ourselves if we're not putting on blinders. So with that, I want to thank you for your time. Thank you again for joining us today. And I believe now it's time for questions. Thank you.